The academy on the alien world was a place of order and power, filled with young warriors from many distant stars, each race proud of its history and skills, each student certain of their strength. The hallways carried the sounds of metal boots and strange voices. Banners of forgotten wars hung on the walls, and in the middle of it all there was a single classroom that echoed with the sound of laughter. Not joyful laughter, but sharp and mocking laughter that was aimed at one student. That student was human, the only human in the entire class. He sat quietly at a desk near the corner, his body small compared to the tall, scaled bodies of the reptilian warriors, compared to the armored shells of the insectoid cadets, compared to the tall, shining figures of the crystalline beings. The human looked fragile, almost breakable, and that was why the laughter never seemed to stop. The instructor stood at the front, a towering figure with gray skin and eyes like polished stone. His voice was cold and sharp as he barked orders. His words carried the weight of authority, and when he looked at the human, he looked not with pride but with disdain. He said the human was too weak, too soft, too slow. He said no human could ever survive real battle among the stars. His words were fuel for the laughter of the other cadets, who beat their claws on desks or hissed through sharp teeth. The human did not argue. He did not shout. He did not cry. He only sat in silence, his eyes fixed not on the instructor and not on the other students, but on the desk in front of him. His hands moved slowly across the surface, fingers tracing the edges, pressing against the frame, tugging slightly at the metal that held the desk together. No one paid much attention at first. They thought he was nervous. They thought he was fidgeting like a child. But in truth, he was measuring, testing, thinking. Every alien in the room had grown up with weapons in their hands. The reptilians with their claws and spears, the insectoids with their bladed arms, the crystalline with their burning shards of light. They believed power came only from what their people had forged long before. But the human's mind moved in a different way. For humans were not given strength in the same way. They had to build it, shape it, and bend the world to their need. And so while the others laughed, the human studied the desk as if it were a puzzle waiting to be solved. The instructor noticed his silence, and silence in a classroom full of laughter was always a challenge to authority. So he raised his voice and called the human to stand. The command echoed against the steel walls. Every cadet turned their eyes to the corner where the human rose, his movements calm, his face unreadable, his eyes sharp and cold. The laughter continued, but softer now, waiting to see what this fragile creature would do. The instructor sneered and asked the human to prove his worth, to show that humans were not only good for farming dirt and building huts. He said warriors fought with weapons forged by masters, weapons passed down by generations, and then he spat out a cruel question. He asked the human if he even knew how to fight, without crying for help. The alien cadets laughed harder than before. The sound rolled like thunder. Some slammed their tails against the floor. Others clicked their jaws. The noise filled the room until it shook the air. But through the storm of noise the human stood steady. His gaze moved once again to the desk, his voice low but clear. He asked a single question. He asked if he was allowed to use anything in the room to prove his worth. The instructor's stone-like face twisted into a smile, cruel and wide, and he answered yes. Use anything. Use whatever you can find. He said it because he thought nothing in the room could ever be shaped into a true weapon. He thought it was another chance to humiliate the human before the class, to break him down and show that humans could never stand as soldiers. The alien cadets roared with laughter again. They thought the idea was ridiculous. They thought the human would grab a chair and swing it like a child in a street fight. They imagined he would stumble and fall, giving them more reason to laugh. But as the laughter spread, the human moved slowly, dragging his desk toward the center of the classroom. The scraping sound of metal against metal silenced some of the students, curiosity growing inside their mocking eyes. He pulled another desk beside it, his hand steady, his eyes calculating, every motion precise, as if he had done this before. The cadets began to whisper, confusion mixing with amusement. The instructor crossed his arms, waiting for the failure he expected. But the human did not stumble, did not falter. He kept working with strange calm, as if the room around him no longer existed. The silence grew heavier, broken only by the creak of bending metal and the faint snap of wires. The laughter faded into whispers, then into uneasy quiet. For in that moment the cadets realized the human was not playing. He was not pretending. He was building something. The part ends as the instructor narrows his eyes, the sound of strained metal ringing in the air. The mocking voice is stilled, and for the first time in that academy classroom, fear touched the edges of curiosity. The classroom was heavy with the echoes of fading laughter. The sound that once rolled like thunder was now breaking apart into smaller fragments. Some cadets hissed and clicked nervously, while others leaned closer to watch. The air had shifted in a strange way, no longer filled with scorn alone, but with a new feeling that none of them could explain. The human stood in the center of the room, with two desks pressed together, his hands working slowly, but with a strange confidence that unsettled everyone watching. The instructor leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, his stone-like eyes cold yet curious. He believed the human would fail, but something about the steady movements unsettled even him. The human was not panicking, not shaking, not rushing as one who fears shame. Instead, he moved with the calm of a craftsman, a person who knows each step before he takes it. This was not random fidgeting. This was design, and the cadets began to notice. The insectoid cadets with sharp antennae tilted their heads, whispering in their clicking voices, asking each other what the human was doing. The reptilian cadets stopped tapping their claws, their golden eyes narrowing as they tried to understand. The crystalline beings pulsed with faint light, as if their bodies reflected the rising tension. The room that had once been filled with cruel laughter now held only the sound of bending metal and stretching wire, each groan of strained material, cutting deeper into the silence. The human bent low, pulling at the frame of one desk, his fingers working the bolts loose, muscles straining in his arms as he forced stubborn pieces free. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his expression did not change. His eyes were locked on the task, as if nothing else existed. Not the watching cadets, not the sneering instructor, only the desk in his hands. The human muttered something under his breath, words too soft for the aliens to catch, but it made his movements sharper, quicker, almost mechanical. A reptilian cadet with scales as red as fire barked out a laugh, trying to break the heavy quiet. He shouted that the human was wasting time, that no desk could save him, that no desk could turn him into a warrior. The voice rang against the metal walls, but the human did not answer. He only continued, pulling wires from beneath the seat, stretching them, testing their strength with sharp tugs. Each sound of snapping wire made the alien cadets flinch, as if something inside them knew instinctively what was coming, but they could not yet name it. The insectoid cadets whispered again, their antennae twitching with unease. They had lived their whole lives with weapons that were part of their own bodies, but they had never seen someone create a weapon out of nothing. One of them clicked in confusion, asking why the human treated broken furniture like it was a prize. Another clicked back, that maybe the human was only stalling, but none of them could look away. Every eye in the room was locked on the human's hands as they moved with quiet determination. The instructor finally spoke, his voice sharp as a blade cutting through the silence. He told the human that enough was enough, that the class had no time for foolish games. But the human did not stop. He only lifted his head and asked again in that calm voice if the challenge had not been to use anything in the room. The instructor sneered and waved a hand, granting permission with a careless gesture, certain that whatever the human built would be nothing but a weak toy. But the cadets were no longer as certain. Something in their instincts told them to keep watching. The human twisted the desk frames together, bending them at strange angles, shaping them with the strength of desperation and experience. The pieces groaned as they gave way. The wires stretched like veins across the frame, pulled tighter and tighter until they hummed with tension. The human's face remained calm, but his eyes burned with focus, his mind already seeing what the others could not yet understand. He was building a tool of war, not crude, not foolish, but something dangerous. The cadets leaned closer, their breathing growing heavy, their earlier laughter gone completely, now replaced by a strange hush, as if even the air feared to break the silence. The reptilian with the red scales finally stopped smirking, his golden eyes narrowing as he watched the human twist one last wire into place. And then it became clear. The shape of the thing in the human's hands was no longer a desk. It was something older, something primal, something every species understood deep in their bones, even if they had never held one before. The human had built a bow, a simple arc of bent frame bound with wires, crude to alien eyes yet alive with lethal promise. When he pulled on the wire, it bent with shocking strength, humming as it strained against his hands. The cadets gasped as one, for they could feel the danger radiating from it. They did not need to understand the design. Their instincts told them enough. This was not a toy. This was a weapon. The instructor's smile faltered. The room was frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the low creak of the bowstring as the human tested its strength. His hands steady, his breathing calm, his eyes sharp and unshaken. In that moment the human did not look weak or fragile. He looked dangerous, and the silence in the classroom was no longer filled with mockery. It was filled with unease. The human reached for a piece of the broken desk, a jagged shard of metal that had snapped free from the frame. He shaped it quickly with the edge of his boot, grinding it against the floor until one end was sharp. Then he lifted it, held it steady, and placed it against the bowstring. The cadet's eyes widened. The reptilian's tail twitched nervously. The insectoid cadets clicked their mandibles without realizing. The crystalline beings dimmed their glow as if retreating within themselves, for they all understood now what was about to happen. The instructor tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat, his mind racing as he realized what the human was holding. The cadets leaned forward with fear and awe. The bow hummed as the string stretched further, the sharp shard of metal pointing toward the back wall. The silence was so deep it felt heavy, like the entire room held its breath, waiting for the sound of release. The human did not smile, did not boast. He only drew the bowstring back until it trembled with power. His eyes locked on the steel wall at the back of the classroom, his breathing calm, as if this was something he had done many times before. The cadets who had mocked him minutes ago now sat frozen, their laughter dead in their throats, their minds filled with only one thought. If this fragile human could turn desks into such a weapon in minutes, what else could his kind do? The moment stretched on. Time itself seemed to hold still, the wire straining like a beast ready to leap. The shard aimed steady and true. The cadets dared not move. The instructor dared not breathe. And in that silence, every soul in the room understood that the human was no longer the weakest creature in the class. He was something else, something they could not mock without fear. The part ends with the bowstring pulled tight, the human's eyes like fire, and the entire classroom silent as the grave, waiting for the sound that would break the air. The classroom trembled with silence, so heavy it felt like a storm pressing against the walls. The human stood at the center of that storm with the strange bow in his hands. The wire stretched tight. The shard of jagged desk metal fitted as if it were always meant to be an arrow. The alien cadets who once mocked him sat frozen in their seats, their eyes wide, their laughter gone, replaced by a new and unwelcome feeling, fear. The bow creaked as the human drew it further, his arms steady, his shoulders tense, his eyes sharp and focused. Every cadet could sense it. This was not a game. This was not foolish improvisation. This was skill. This was experience, the kind that could only be born from a species that had known struggle in every form. The human had taken broken pieces of furniture and shaped them into something older than starships, older than plasma rifles, older than any alien technology in the room. A weapon that spoke to the primal part of every living creature, a bow. The reptilian cadets who prided themselves on their savage claws leaned back, their scales rippling as instinct screamed inside them, for they knew the tension of a predator ready to strike. The insectoid cadets who had laughed earlier now clicked nervously, their mandibles tapping against each other as unease filled their minds. The crystalline cadets dimmed their inner light, their glowing bodies shrinking back as if to hide from the danger that radiated from the fragile creature at the center of the room. And even the instructor, a warrior hardened by battles across half the galaxy, narrowed his stone-like eyes as the weight of the moment pressed on him. The human released the bowstring. The wire snapped forward with a sharp, violent hum. The shard of metal shot across the room with terrifying speed. The sound cracked like thunder, and the steel wall at the back of the classroom shook as the arrow slammed into it, embedding deep into the surface. Sparks burst and scattered across the floor. The force of the strike silenced every breath in the room. The cadets stared at the wall in disbelief, their minds struggling to understand how a desk could be turned into a weapon that pierced steel. The instructor's mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. He stared at the embedded shard, buried halfway into the wall, where no ordinary hand could have placed it. Then his gaze returned to the human, and in that moment he realized something dreadful. The laughter of the class had not only been silenced, it had been buried beneath fear and respect. The human lowered the bow slowly, his breathing steady, his eyes calm. He looked at the cadets one by one, meeting their gazes without flinching. His voice carried clear across the silent classroom. He said that humans did not wait for weapons to be given to them. He said that humans created weapons when none were offered, that survival was not a gift for his kind but a skill carved into their bones. He said that humans endured because they could turn anything into a tool of war, even desks. The reptilian with the red scales who had mocked the loudest sat stiff, his tail twitching nervously, his golden eyes unable to look away from a weapon in the human's hands. He opened his mouth, but closed it again. No words came, for what could he say? The human had done what none of them imagined possible. The insectoid cadets shifted in their seats, their antennae twitching nervously. They whispered in their clicking voices, but their whispers were not cruel now. They carried fear, respect, and confusion. The crystalline cadets pulsed faint light, their bodies unsettled by the silence that followed the human's words. The instructor finally found his voice, though it shook in ways the cadets had never heard before. He demanded to know how the human had learned this, where such strange knowledge came from. He demanded to know why the human treated scraps like treasure. The human's answer was simple. He said that on his world humans were never given enough. They had to make what they needed. They had to fight with what they could find, and that lesson was written in every generation of his people. The instructor stared long, his mind turning, his stone-like eyes narrowing. He had seen warriors trained from birth to carry blades. He had seen soldiers born with weapons built into their own bodies. But this was something different. This was not natural strength. This was not inherited power. This was will. This was creation born of need. And in that moment the instructor understood something terrible. If humans could do this with desks, what could they do with warships? What could they do with battlefields full of wreckage and steel? The human stepped back, releasing the bowstring. The weapon hung loose in his hand, but the danger did not fade. The cadets leaned away instinctively as he walked slowly back to the wall. His fingers curled around the shard embedded deep in the steel. With one hard pull he yanked it free, sparks raining to the ground, the sound echoing like a warning bell. He turned and walked back to the center, lifting the bow once more, fitting the shard again as if to show them all that his weapon was not a trick, not a single strike, but a tool he could use again and again. The reptilian cadet shifted uneasily, his scaled chest heaving. He barked out that the human should face a real opponent, that firing at a wall proved nothing. His words were meant to restore pride, but they shook with nerves. The instructor looked at him with narrowed eyes, but he did not stop the challenge. The human only tilted his head, his gaze sharp and cold, and he asked softly if the cadet wished to be the target instead of the wall. The silence that followed was so deep that even the hum of the academy lights seemed to vanish. The reptilian cadet's golden eyes widened, his throat tightened, and for the first time he did not move. His tail lay still, his claws retracted. His pride fought his fear, but his body knew the truth. If the human released that string aimed at him, he would fall before he could take a step. The cadet looked away, shame in his eyes, but beneath it something else, respect, for even his predator's heart recognized a greater predator in that moment. The insectoid cadets clicked quietly, their mandibles sharp but their voices low. They said to each other that no prey creature could carry such calm. They said that no weakling could hold death in his hands with such ease. The crystalline cadets dimmed again, their glowing bodies shaking faintly, as if their crystal cores resonated with the tension in the room. The instructor himself said nothing, his silence louder than any command he had ever given. The human lowered the bow once more, his voice calm as he spoke again. He said that laughter had been their weapon against him, but weapons lose their edge when the enemy does not fear them. He said that humans had heard laughter like theirs for centuries, and still humanity endured, still humanity fought, and still humanity rose. He told them that a bow made from desks was not strange to him. It was natural, for his kind always found a way, always shaped survival out of whatever lay in front of them. The classroom was no longer a place of scorn. It had become a place of revelation. The cadets no longer saw a fragile creature in human skin. They saw something else, something dangerous, something that should never be underestimated. The bow in his hands was proof. The steel wall pierced was proof. And the silence that wrapped the entire room was proof. The part ends with the human standing tall, the bow in one hand, the shard of metal in the other, and the instructor watching him with narrowed eyes, not in mockery now, but in caution, while every cadet in the room sat frozen, their fear mixing with awe, their laughter gone forever. The silence of the academy classroom was heavy like a mountain pressing down on every chest. The bow in the human's hand seemed alive, each wire trembling with stored power, each shard of metal ready to fly like lightning. The cadets who had mocked minutes before now sat frozen in place, their breath shallow, their hearts uneasy, their laughter long buried in fear. The instructor himself stood stiff, his stone-like eyes narrowed as he tried to read the calm face of the human before him. The human lifted the bow once more. The frame of twisted desks groaned under the pressure. The wire hummed with tension as his arms pulled back. And again he fitted the shard of jagged metal. His eyes locked on the steel wall at the far end of the classroom. His movements had no hesitation, no wasted energy. Only precise steps, as though every moment was guided by memory, as though he had been here before, facing not desks and cadets, but real enemies and real survival. The reptilian cadets who had roared with laughter earlier now found their throats dry, their scales rippling with unease as the ancient predator inside them recognized the posture of a hunter ready to strike. The insectoid cadets who had once clicked with mockery now sat silent, their antennae drawn tight against their heads, their instincts screaming at them to stay still, to stay quiet. The crystalline cadets dimmed their radiant glow, their crystal cores vibrating faintly in fear, for even though they had never seen such a weapon, every spark of their being told them it was deadly. The human's breathing was steady, slow, controlled. His eyes never wavered. His arms held the wire pulled tight until it quivered like a trapped storm. The instructor opened his mouth to order him to stop, but the words caught in his throat. Something in the air silenced even him, for he felt the tension like a blade pressed against his chest. He felt that if he spoke, if he moved, the arrow would not strike the wall, but him instead. And then the human released. The wire snapped forward with a violent hum that shook the room. The shard of metal tore through the air faster than the eye could follow. The sound cracked like thunder splitting the sky. The steel wall at the back of the classroom rang like a massive bell as the shard slammed deep into it. Sparks burst across the floor, and the echo of impact rattled every desk and every seat. The cadets gasped as one, their jaws wide, their eyes fixed on the arrow buried deep in steel, deeper than they had thought possible from the hands of a fragile human. The sound faded slowly, leaving only silence heavier than before. Not one cadet dared to speak. Not one dared to laugh. The reptilian with red scales who had shouted the loudest before now sat stiff, his golden eyes locked on the embedded shard, his tail curling around his legs as if to shield himself from the truth before him. The insectoid cadets clicked faintly, but not in mockery now. Their clicks were nervous, like the sound of prey sensing danger near. The crystalline cadets glowed faintly. Again, their light flickering like a candle threatened by wind. The human lowered the bow slowly, his arms relaxed, his breathing still calm. He looked around the room, meeting each pair of alien eyes, his own gaze sharp, steady, unshaken. His voice rang clear, not loud, but heavy with meaning. He said that this was what humans were. He said that humans did not wait for someone to hand them tools of survival. They built them from nothing. He said the humans did not fear being unarmed, because being unarmed only meant building a weapon from whatever was. Near a stone, a stick, a desk, anything, everything. The instructor stared long, his jaw clenched, his eyes like stone yet uncertain. He had thought the human weak, fragile, laughable, but the steel wall held a shard of proof buried deep within it, proof that mocked every doubt he had carried, proof that echoed louder than the laughter of his cadets. The instructor's hands curled into fists, not from anger, but from unease, for he had fought many species across the stars, but few had ever frightened him without even raising a weapon forged by war. This human had created one in minutes, and that unsettled even his hardened heart. The reptilian cadet with red scales rose halfway from his seat, his claws clicking against the desk. He shouted that it was a trick, that steel walls could be pierced by luck, that the human was nothing but chance. His voice cracked as he spoke, his pride fighting his fear. The human turned his gaze on him, calm, sharp, cold, and lifted the bow once more. The shard fitted back against the wire with quiet precision. The string pulled back until it quivered, and the arrow pointed not at the wall, this time but at the reptilian's chest. The cadet froze, every muscle stiff, his tail locked in place, his claws retracted, his golden eyes wide with shock. The other cadets shifted uneasily, their hearts racing. The insectoid cadets clicked nervously, but made no move to stop what was unfolding. The crystalline cadets glowed faint and weak, their bodies reflecting fear. The instructor's stone-like face hardened as he watched. He almost spoke, but again no words came. The human did not fire. He only held the bow steady, the wire humming with deadly tension, and every heartbeat in the room felt like thunder waiting for lightning. The reptilian cadet trembled though he tried to hide it. His pride clashed with the truth his body already knew. If the human released the string, he would not survive the next second. The silence dragged long, stretching until it became unbearable. Then the human lowered the bow slowly, releasing the tension, his voice calm and quiet. He said there was no need to prove more, for the cadet already knew the truth. His body had told him, his heart had told him, every instinct had told him humans were not prey. Humans were predators who built their claws from scraps. The reptilian cadet sank back into his seat, his tail limp, his golden eyes looking anywhere but at the human, shame on his face, respect buried beneath it. The other cadets watched in silence, their minds torn between disbelief and awe. The instructor finally spoke, his voice softer than before. He said that perhaps the human had proven his point. His words carried no mockery now, only weight. The cadets glanced at him and then back to the human, for they knew the truth had been carved into the steel wall and into their own hearts. The human dismantled the bow slowly, unwinding the wires, loosening the frame, but his calm movements did not bring peace. Instead, they carried a quiet warning, for if he could build it once, he could build it again. If he could do it with desks, he could do it with anything. The cadets knew it. The instructor knew it. The truth was unshakable. This was no accident. This was no trick. This was the nature of humanity. The part ends as the human returns to his seat, the broken pieces of desk still in his hands, the steel wall scarred forever by the arrow that struck it. The instructor silent, the cadets silent, all of them staring at the human with a new feeling they had never given him before. Not pity, not scorn, but fear mixed with respect, and that silence would never be broken again by laughter. The classroom was no longer filled with mocking laughter. It was now filled with something heavier, a silence that pressed against every wall. The steel panel at the back still bore the scar of the human's arrow, the twisted shard of desk metal buried deep within it. Every cadet stared at that mark with unease, for they all knew it should not have been possible, and yet it had been done before their eyes, done by the smallest and weakest student among them, the human who sat quietly with the bow resting across his knees. The instructor stood frozen for long moments, his stone-like face unreadable, but inside his mind was racing. He had seen battlefields where weapons of unimaginable power clashed. He had seen ships shattered by plasma fire. He had seen warriors with bodies built for war. But he had never seen anything like this. Never seen a fragile creature build a weapon in minutes and strike fear into hardened cadets. His pride fought with his reason. He wanted to dismiss it, to call it a trick. But the steel wall did not lie, and neither did the looks of his cadets, who sat like prey before a hunter. The reptilian cadet with red scales twitched his tail. His golden eyes narrowed. Shame burned in his chest because he had been the loudest voice of mockery, and now he was the most shaken. He slammed his claws against his desk and shouted that words and tricks meant nothing. He said a true warrior proved strength against living flesh, not against steel walls. He demanded a test. He demanded the human face him or any other cadet in combat. The instructor's eyes flicked toward him, and for a moment he considered denying the challenge. But then his gaze fell back on the human, quiet, calm, unreadable, and he wondered what would happen if the test was allowed. The human rose slowly, his hand steady as he lifted the bow once more. His voice was low but clear. He asked if the challenge was truly being given. He asked if the reptilian truly wished to stand before him as a target instead of the wall. The cadet's scales rippled. His chest heaved. Pride forced him to nod, though every instinct in his body screamed against it. The other cadets shifted uneasily, their antennae twitching, their crystalline bodies glowing faint with nervous pulses. The air was heavy with dread. The instructor finally spoke, his voice sharp yet uncertain. He said that no cadet would be harmed. This was a training hall, not a battlefield, but he would allow a demonstration. He told the reptilian to step forward and the human to prepare, his eyes never leaving the fragile figure that held the bow, as if it were an extension of his own body. His heart cold with unease at what he was about to witness. The reptilian stepped into the open, his claws flexing, his muscles tight beneath the scales. He towered over the human, his golden eyes filled with fire. Yet the fire flickered with doubt. The human did not flinch, did not tremble. He raised the bow slowly, fitting the shard of metal once again, pulling the string back until it quivered. His eyes locked on the reptilian's chest, calm and cold. The silence grew unbearable. Every cadet watching with wide eyes, their breath caught in their throats. The reptilian's instincts screamed louder with every passing second. His tail lashed, his claws trembled. He had faced predators before. He had fought in blood trials, where only the strongest survived. Yet never had he felt such a suffocating weight pressing on his chest. The human's gaze was not the gaze of prey. It was the gaze of a predator who had already chosen the outcome. It was the gaze of one who could kill without hesitation. The reptilian tried to step forward, but his foot refused. His body betrayed him, frozen by the simple calm of the human's aim. The insectoid cadets clicked nervously, whispering in rapid patterns. They said no weak species should hold such control. They said no prey creature should make predators tremble. The crystalline cadets pulsed dim light, their bodies shaking with faint vibrations. They whispered through their resonant hums that the human was unnatural, that his calm was more frightening than the weapon itself. The instructor's jaw tightened, his stone-like eyes watching every twitch of the reptilian's body, waiting for the moment when pride would give way to survival. The human held the bowstring tight, never wavering, his voice calm as flowing water. He said that this was the truth of his kind. The humans did not need to strike to win. They needed only to show they could. He said that fear was a weapon sharper than any blade, that hesitation was a wound deeper than any arrow. His words struck harder than the shard itself, for they echoed inside every cadet's mind. They saw themselves not mocking a fragile human anymore, but standing helpless before a predator disguised as one. The reptilian finally broke, his chest heaved, his tail sagged. He lowered his gaze, unable to meet the human's eyes any longer. The pride that had carried him forward shattered beneath the weight of instinct. He knew if the string was released he would fall. He knew it as deeply as he knew his own heartbeat. He stepped back slowly, his golden eyes filled with shame. The human lowered the bow, releasing the tension, the wire humming one last time before falling silent. The room exhaled as though they had all been holding their breath. The instructor's voice was softer when he spoke. He said that the point had been proven. No blood had been shed, yet a battle had been fought and lost, not on the floor but in the mind. He looked at the reptilian cadet and saw defeat. He looked at the human and saw victory, a victory carved not by claws or fire, but by calm will and deadly intent. The cadets whispered again, but not with laughter, not with scorn. They whispered with fear, with awe, with respect that none had ever thought they would feel for a creature so small and fragile. The human lowered the bow entirely now, placing it against the desk, his hands resting lightly on the wood, his eyes sweeping across the classroom. He told them again that this was humanity, that humans did not come with natural weapons, that humans were not born with claws or armor or light, but that humans built, humans created, humans turned weakness into strength. He said that every scrap could be a blade, every stone could be a hammer, every desk could be a bow, and that was why humans endured, why humans survived when others fell. The instructor stood silent, his mind turning. The cadets sat in silence, their bodies stiff, their hearts unsteady, and in that silence a truth settled over the room, a truth none could ignore, that the human was not weak, that the human was not prey, that the human was something else entirely, something dangerous, something cunning, something that would one day stand among them not as a student mocked but as a warrior feared. The part ends as the human picks up the bow once more, not to fire but to rest it across his shoulder, his gaze sharp and cold, his voice quiet, yet carrying through the entire room. He asks softly if any others wish to test him, and no cadet moves, no voice answers. The silence of fear is his answer, and that silence is louder than any laughter that once filled the classroom. The academy classroom no longer felt like a place of learning. It felt like a cage filled with creatures who had just discovered a predator among them. The bow of bent desks rested across the human shoulder. The steel wall at the back still held the deep scar of the arrow, and the cadets who once mocked him now sat silent, their bodies stiff, their voices gone, their laughter buried under the weight of realization. The human was no longer the weakest figure in the room. He was now the one they feared the most. The instructor stood at the front, his arms heavy at his sides, his stone-like face hardened, but his eyes sharper than before. He studied the human with a caution that he had never shown to any other cadet. His pride had been wounded, but his instincts told him something far more troubling, for he had lived long enough to recognize danger when it revealed itself, and the fragile human with calm eyes had revealed it without hesitation, without cruelty, only with skill and will, and that made it worse. The reptilian cadet with red scales still lowered his gaze, shame burning his chest, his golden eyes refusing to meet the human's. His tail curled tight around his legs, as though to hide him from the memory of his fear. He had wanted to stand as the loudest challenger, but now he sat as the quietest. The insectoid cadets shifted uneasily in their seats, their mandibles tapping nervously as they whispered in broken clicks. They asked each other what kind of species could do this, what kind of creature could turn scraps into power. Their antennae twitched with unease, their instincts whispering answers none of them wished to say. The crystalline cadets glowed faintly in pale colors, their light pulsing slow and unsteady, the resonance of their cores vibrating with tension. Their crystalline minds had always relied on logic and pattern, yet they could find no pattern here, no explanation for how weakness could transform into danger so quickly. Their glowing bodies reflected confusion and fear, and they dimmed themselves instinctively as though to shrink away from the gaze of the human, who now sat with a strange weapon, resting beside him as if it were nothing more than a tool of study. The instructor's voice finally broke the silence, sharp yet quieter than usual. He told the cadets to remember what they had seen. He told them that mockery was no shield, that underestimating an enemy was death. His words were not for the human, but for the rest of the class. Yet every syllable only reminded them of what they already knew, that the fragile creature among them was not to be mocked, not to be dismissed. The cadets listened with wide eyes, but their attention was drawn always back, to the human, back to the bow, back to the scar on the wall. The human sat calm, his eyes moving slowly across the room. He spoke again, his voice clear and even. He said that out in the void no one gave his people weapons. No one handed them safety. They survived with whatever they could shape, whatever they could break, whatever they could build. He said that humans learned not to wait for help, not to wait for rescue. They learned to survive by their own hands, and that was why they endured. That was why they could turn anything into a tool of war. And his words carried a weight that struck deeper than the arrow. The cadets shifted. Some looked away. Others stared with fascination. None of them dared to laugh, for laughter now felt foolish, dangerous, like stepping into the jaws of a beast. The reptilian cadet clenched his claws, but kept them hidden beneath the desk, his shame heavy. The insectoid cadets clicked nervously, but made no challenge. The crystalline cadets glowed faint and weak, their fear shining like pale light. The silence stretched long and unbroken, the sound of the human's voice still, lingering in their minds like an echo that refused to fade. The instructor's mind turned, heavy with thought. He remembered wars where species fought with the tools they had carried for ages. He remembered soldiers who died because their weapons failed. But he had never considered what it meant to fight a species that could build new weapons in the moment, that could improvise from ruins, that could survive on scraps. The thought unsettled him. It twisted inside his mind. For if one cadet could do this with desks in a classroom, then what could an army of humans do on a battlefield littered with wreckage? What could a fleet of humans do with broken ships and torn metal? The human's gaze moved once more across the class, and though he spoke softly, his words rang clear. He asked if any others still believed he was fragile, still believed he was weak. The silence answered him. Silence from every cadet. Silence from the instructor himself. Not one voice dared to rise against him, and in that silence he smiled faintly, not in pride, not in arrogance, but in quiet certainty, as though the outcome had always been inevitable, as though he had known they would see the truth eventually. The cadets could not shake the feeling that they had glimpsed something greater than themselves, a truth that reached beyond the classroom walls. They saw not just a single human cadet, but the shadow of an entire species behind him, millions of hands building, millions of minds creating, turning weakness into strength, turning nothing into something deadly. And the thought unsettled them deeply, for they realized that such a species could never be conquered easily, never be broken easily, never be underestimated without grave cost. The reptilian cadet with red scales raised his head at last, his golden eyes filled not with rage now, but with something else, something heavier, respect buried beneath fear. He opened his mouth as though to speak, but closed it again, unable to find words. His pride was wounded, but he could not deny the truth. The human had defeated him without striking, without spilling blood, and that defeat would stay with him longer than any wound of battle. The instructor stepped forward slowly, his stone-like face unchanging but his movements measured. He looked at the human and said that the academy had taught many lessons across generations, but today the cadets had learned a lesson none of their kind could have given. Today they had learned that strength was not only in claws or shells or blades, but in mind and will and creation. His voice was heavy, each word striking the cadets harder than the last, and though he did not say it directly, every cadet knew his meaning. The human had given them that lesson. The classroom remained tense, every pair of alien eyes still shifting between the human and the scar in the wall, the air thick with awe and unease. Yet the human only leaned back in his seat, the bow resting at his side, his hands folded calmly, as if nothing had happened, as if the silence around him was natural. The cadets watched in disbelief, for he did not demand their respect. He simply held it without effort, and that was more frightening than any threat. The part ends as the instructor turns back toward the class, his voice heavy with command. He tells them the day's training is over. The cadets rise slowly, their bodies stiff, their minds filled with the image of the human with the bow, their steps quiet, their whispers hushed. They leave the room not laughing but silent, and in that silence one truth lingers above all others, that humanity was not weak, that humanity was not prey, that humanity was something different, something that turned fear into survival, and survival into power. The halls of the academy were quiet after the training ended. The cadets walked in uneasy silence, their claws dragging softly, their antennae twitching nervously, their crystalline bodies dim with faint uncertain glow. They had entered the classroom laughing, mocking, sure of their superiority, but they left it with lowered gazes and heavy thoughts. The scar on the steel wall still burned in their memory, the scar made not by claws or plasma, not by weapons of war, but by a human with nothing but desks and wire and will. The human walked behind them at an even pace, his eyes calm, his shoulders steady. He carried no weapon now, yet every cadet moved aside when he passed. None dared block his path. None dared mock his presence. They had seen too much. They had felt the weight of his gaze. They had heard the wire hum like thunder, and they had seen the arrow pierce steel. The human did not smile, and did not boast. He only walked as if nothing was strange, as if it was natural for him to create fear out of scraps. And that made it worse, for it meant he could do it again anywhere, anytime. The instructor remained behind in the classroom, his stone-like face hard as ever, but his thoughts deep and unsettled. He stared long at the wall with the shard buried within it. He touched the mark with one heavy hand, his fingers brushing the scar, and he knew no words could erase what had been shown. No lecture could undo what the cadets had felt. He whispered softly to himself, though none were there to hear. He whispered that if this was what a single human cadet could do with desks, then what would an army of humans do with warships? What would a fleet of humans do with wreckage and ruins? What would a world of humans do if cornered with nothing but desperation? The cadets gathered in the mess hall later, their voices hushed, their bodies tense, They spoke in broken whispers. The reptilian cadet, with red scales, sat in silence, his golden eyes low, his tail wrapped tight around his legs. Shame weighed on him heavier than stone. He had mocked the loudest, challenged the boldest, and yet he had been defeated without a single strike. Defeated by fear itself. He could not deny it. He could not explain it. But he felt it in his chest like a brand that would never fade. He had looked into the eyes of the human and seen something older, something darker, something that belonged to predators who refused to die. The insectoid cadets clicked nervously, their antennae curling. They asked each other if all humans were like this, if every member of that species carried the same strange power. One answered that perhaps this human was unique. Another clicked back that no, this was not unique. This was instinct. This was something that came from a world that demanded survival from the moment of birth. And they shivered at the thought of an entire planet filled with such minds, turning every scrap into weapons, turning every weakness into strength. The crystalline cadets spoke in low harmonic tones, their voices trembling like faint chimes. They said the human's calm was the most frightening thing, not the bow, not the shard, but the stillness of his gaze, the way he held death in his hands without trembling, without hesitation. They said it was unnatural. Yet they could not deny it was real. They dimmed their light further, as if to hide from their own thoughts, their crystalline cores vibrating faintly with unease that no lesson had ever taught them before. The human sat alone, not seeking their words, not asking for their respect, his hands folded on the table, his eyes quiet, his face calm. He did not need to speak. The silence around him was enough. The cadets glanced at him, but quickly looked away. Unable to meet his gaze, unable to face the reminder that weakness was not weakness when it carried such will. The human ate his meal slowly, each bite simple, and the cadets realized that even in such ordinary actions, they could not shake the image of him drawing the bowstring back, the wire humming like thunder, the arrow aimed steady as death. The instructor entered the hall, his heavy steps echoing, his eyes sweeping across the cadets, his voice sharp though quieter than before. He told them to remember this day, to carve it into their memory. He said that wars are not won only by strength given at birth. Wars are not won only by weapons forged in fire. Wars are won by those who refuse to surrender, by those who turn nothing into something. He said that underestimating humanity would be a mistake they could never afford. His words carried the weight of warning, and the cadets listened without laughter, without mockery, only with silence. The reptilian cadet finally raised his golden eyes, his voice low and heavy. He said that he had never felt fear like that before, not in battle, not in trials. He said the human's gaze had frozen him more than claws or blades ever had. He said he would never forget it. The insectoid cadets clicked in uneasy agreement. The crystalline cadets pulsed faint light, as if echoing the same truth. The instructor nodded slowly, for he too had felt it, though he would never admit it aloud. The human had forced every soul in that room to face something they had never known, respect born of fear. The human finally spoke, his voice quiet but strong. He said that humanity had always been mocked, always been doubted, always been underestimated. He said that laughter had followed his kind across stars and across centuries, but laughter never killed them. Laughter only sharpened them. He said that every mockery was fuel, every doubt was fire, and that humans survived not because they were given power, but because they built it, because they shaped it, because they refused to fall. His words hung heavy in the hall, and no one dared to challenge them. The instructor dismissed the cadets, his voice calm, but as they rose and left they moved with unease, their eyes shifting back toward the human again and again. The reptilian cadet paused at the doorway, his golden eyes meeting the human's for a moment, and in that moment he lowered his head, a gesture of respect that burned his pride, yet felt necessary. The insectoid cadets followed quietly, their clicks subdued, the crystalline cadets dim and pale as they slipped out. The hall emptied until only the instructor and the human remained. The instructor stepped closer, his stone-like eyes narrowed, his voice heavy. He said that the human had changed the academy in a single day, that no one would forget, that no one would mock again. He said that fear had become the human's weapon and respect its shadow. The human looked at him, calm and steady, and said softly that this was only the beginning, that one human could build a bow from desks, But 1,000 humans could build something far greater from ruins. His word struck the instructor harder than any arrow, and though he did not show it, his heart grew colder with unease. The part ends as the instructor turns away, whispering under his breath words not meant for anyone else, words that carried both warning and awe. He whispered that if this was what they did with desks, then what would they do with warships? His steps echoed down the hall, leaving the human alone in silence, the scar of the arrow still fresh in memory, the lesson carved forever into the hearts of all who had witnessed it, a lesson of fear and respect that would never be forgotten.